Imagine the soft rustle of wind moving through tall grass, the quiet toll of a distant bell, and the faint smell of earth after rain. You are stepping into another time, another world, a place where history unfolds slowly, like the turning of the seasons. This is history to relax, where we walk gently through the past together. So find a comfortable place, sit back, and let your mind wander freely as the story carries you along. If you enjoy this journey, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from. We'd love to know where our community is tuning in as we drift together into history. Part 1. Life in a feudal village. Close your eyes and picture yourself walking down a narrow dirt path. The earth is soft beneath your feet, pressed flat by the steps of countless others who have walked here before you. To one side stretch open fields divided into strips of crops. On the other side, you see small cottages built of wood and wattle, their thatched roofs bending under the weight of the seasons. Smoke rises gently from the holes at their tops, curling upward into the pale morning sky. This is not a bustling city, nor a place of trade and freedom. This is the heart of a medieval village, and it is here that feudal life was lived day after day. Feudalism was more than a political system. It was a way of organizing society, a chain of relationships built on obligation and duty. At the very top was the king, who ruled in name but whose real power often depended on the loyalty of his lords. Beneath him were great nobles who owned large lands, and beneath them still were knights and smaller landholders. But the base of the entire structure, the foundation without which nothing could survive, were the peasants. They worked the land, they tended the animals, and they carried on lives that, though humble, sustained everyone above them. Imagine being one of these peasants. Your house is a single room, shared with your family, and perhaps even a few animals for warmth in the cold months. The walls are rough, the air smoky from the hearth, and the floor is hard-packed earth. You wake before the sun rises, not because of choice but because survival demands it. The lord of the manor owns the land you work, and while you may tend a small strip for your own family, most of your labor is owed to him. The rhythm of your days is tied to the soil, sowing in spring, tending through summer, harvesting in autumn, and struggling to endure the long, lean months of winter. The manor itself is the center of this world. A large house, often fortified, stands slightly apart from the village cottages. The lord who lives there holds authority over everyone in the surrounding land. He protects the people, but that protection is not free. In return, peasants give labor, goods, and obedience. Some are free tenants, able to move if they choose, but many are serfs, bound to the land, unable to leave without permission. To modern ears this sounds like captivity, yet in their own time it was simply the way of life. Generations were born, lived, and died without stepping beyond the boundaries of the manor. The church, too, plays its role in the village. A small stone building with a bell tower often rises at the center, its shadow stretching over the fields. Faith shaped every aspect of life. The calendar itself was filled with holy days, festivals, and fasts. Priests reminded villagers that suffering on earth was part of a divine plan, and that obedience to both God and Lord would bring reward in heaven. For many, this faith was a source of comfort, a way to endure hardship, famine, or disease. On Sundays the entire village gathered there, dressed in their best clothes, the sound of voices rising together in prayer. For an hour at least, the divisions of status seemed less heavy. Yet the divisions remained everywhere. The diet of a peasant was simple and repetitive. Coarse bread made from rye or barley, pottage boiled from vegetables, and perhaps some cheese or eggs when available. Meat was rare, usually eaten only during special feasts. Hunger was a familiar companion, especially if harvests were poor. The lord and his household, however, dined on meats, wines, and sweet spices brought from distant lands. The very act of eating showed the gap between ruler and subject. Still, life was not without its moments of joy. Festivals broke up the grind of work. Weddings filled the village with laughter, music, and dancing. Children played in the fields, chasing one another between the strips of crops. Evenings by the hearth were spent telling stories and singing old songs passed down through memory. Hardship and joy were woven together, each giving meaning to the other. In this way, the village carried on through the centuries. The structure of feudalism seemed stable, almost eternal. Each person had a place, and that place was understood. The lord provided land and protection. The peasant provided labor and goods. The church gave meaning to their struggles. From the outside it looked unchanging, as though time itself had slowed within the walls of the manor. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Population growth stretched resources thin. Discontent simmered in hearts longing for freedom. And beyond the village horizon, forces were gathering that would change this world forever. For now, though, picture once more that village path. The cottages are small, the fields stretch out under the sky, and the bell of the church rings to call the villagers to prayer. The feudal bond still holds firm. The rhythm of life beats steadily, one season after another, as it has for generations. It feels timeless, unshakable. Yet history is always moving, even when those who live it cannot yet feel the ground shift beneath their feet. Part 2. The Bonds of the Manor. Imagine again the small village, quiet in the early morning. Mist drifts across the fields, and the sound of a rooster breaks the silence. The peasants begin their day, not with choice but with duty. Every task, every step, is tied to the bonds of the manor. These bonds are not simple chains of iron but rules, customs, and expectations that knit the community together while also holding it firmly in place. At the center of these bonds is the Lord. His authority reaches into nearly every aspect of life. He owns the land, and the people who live on it cannot simply leave. For the serf, freedom is not a matter of walking away. His family, his strip of field, and his future are tied to the soil itself. If he leaves without permission, he risks being hunted down or punished. For some, this meant that life was a narrow circle: birth, work, worship, and death within the same few miles. The obligations of the manor are many. A peasant must work the Lord's fields several days each week. This is known as labor service. He plants, tends, and harvests crops not for his own family, but for the Lord's household. On top of this, he owes rents, often in the form of a share of his own harvest. Grain, eggs, or chickens may be delivered as dues. If a pig is slaughtered, the Lord may claim a portion of the meat. Even the simple act of baking bread ties the villager to the manor. Some lords require peasants to use the manor oven, charging a fee each time. There are other duties too. If the Lord calls, peasants must help repair roads, dig ditches, or haul timber. They may be ordered to gather firewood from the forest or bring stones to build a new wall. In times of war, they may be required to carry supplies for soldiers or fortify the manor house. Though peasants are rarely fighters, their labor supports those who are. These obligations are balanced, at least in theory, by the Lord's promise of protection. When bandits roam the countryside or when rival lords send raiding parties, the manor house serves as a refuge. Its thick walls and guarded gates stand as symbols of safety. In return for labor and loyalty, peasants expect shelter from danger, however limited that shelter might be. For women, the bonds of the manor are felt just as strongly, though often in different ways. A peasant woman works the fields alongside her husband, but she also tends the home, prepares meals, raises children, and spins or weaves cloth. Her days are long, filled with countless small tasks that keep the household alive. She too is subject to manorial rules. If she marries, her choice may require the Lord's approval. If her husband dies, she may have to pay a fee simply to remain on the land. Freedom, for her, is just as distant. Even small milestones of life are marked by manorial rights. When a child is born, a family may owe a fee. When a villager dies, the best animal or piece of furniture might be claimed by the Lord as a death duty. These customs remind everyone that nothing within the manor is fully their own. Life, in many ways, is leased rather than owned. And yet, the manor is not only a place of burdens. It is also a community. People know one another's families, share in the same struggles, and gather for festivals in the village square. They help each other with tasks too heavy for one household to manage alone. A barn is raised, a field is cleared, or a sick neighbor is given aid. These bonds of obligation extend sideways as well as upward, tying villagers together in shared survival. Justice, too, flows through the manor. The lord or his steward holds a manorial court, where disputes are settled. If a peasant steals firewood from the forest, grazes animals on forbidden land, or refuses his duties, the court decides the penalty. Sometimes it is a fine, sometimes labor, and in rare cases harsher punishment. The rules may seem harsh, but they maintain the order on which feudal society depends. Without them, the fragile balance between lord and peasant could break. Children grow up learning these bonds from the start. A boy follows his father to the fields, helping to drive the oxen or sow seed. A girl helps her mother spin wool or carry water from the well. By the time they reach adulthood, they understand what is expected: to work, to obey, and to pass these same obligations to their children. Generations turn like the seasons, bound always to the soil. Yet even within these limits, there are small spaces of negotiation. A clever peasant may bargain with his lord, offering extra rent in money instead of labor. A widow may persuade the steward to let her keep her cottage. Custom and law provide rules, but human lives find ways to bend within them. These small acts of agency remind us that even within strict systems, people seek paths of choice. The bonds of the manor, then, are not only about control. They are about survival. The lord needs the labor of his peasants, and the peasants need the protection of their lord. The church blesses this arrangement, teaching that each person has a place appointed by God. To question it is to question the order of the world itself. For centuries, this belief holds the structure firm. As you picture the village again, see the fields busy with labor. Men and women bend over rows of grain. Children chase geese near the cottages. Smoke drifts from chimneys, carrying the smell of bread and stew. The manor house stands at the edge, watching over all. These are the bonds of the manor, unseen yet unbreakable, tying lives together in work, in duty, and in faith. But history moves, even through bonds that seem eternal. Soon, pressures will begin to strain this delicate web. More mouths to feed, more taxes to pay, and new forces from beyond the manor walls. The old ties will be tested, and the bonds that once seemed so strong will begin to loosen. Part 3. The first cracks appear. The world of the manor seems steady, its rhythm unchanging from one generation to the next. The seasons turn, the church bells ring, and peasants work the land under the watchful eye of their lord. To those who live within it, feudal life feels fixed, as though it could last forever. Yet even in this seemingly unshakable system, pressure begins to build. Quietly at first, almost unnoticed, the first cracks appear. During the 12th and 13th centuries, Europe's population grows quickly. Families have more children, and villages expand. New lands are cleared for farming. Forests are cut down, swamps drained, and even hillsides terraced to make space for crops. For a time, this expansion brings prosperity. Fields yield enough grain, and more people mean more hands to work. The villages seem full of life and energy. But there is a limit to how much land can be brought under the plow. As the population rises, space becomes scarce. Families divide their strips of land among children, and each generation works with less than the one before. Where once a family had enough to sustain itself, now the harvest struggles to stretch through the winter. Hunger creeps quietly into cottages, turning lean months into seasons of despair. This strain reveals itself most sharply when harvests fail. A single bad season may be survived, with neighbors sharing what little they can. But when poor weather lasts for years, disaster follows. In the early 14th century, heavy rains soak the fields of northern Europe. Crops rot, grain stores run empty, and famine spreads. Villagers eat bark, roots, and whatever scraps they can find. Many perish, not from war or plague, but from the simple absence of food. The bonds of the manor, once a shield of security, cannot protect against nature's harshness. Even when harvests are good, discontent grows. As lords demand rents and labor, peasants feel the weight of obligations more keenly. Some begin to question why they must give so much when their families go hungry. Rumors of unrest travel from village to village, carried by travelers and traders. Though the church preaches obedience, the hunger in a child's eyes makes obedience harder to bear. Another force begins to stir within this world, the lure of freedom in towns. Across Europe, small settlements swell into bustling centers of trade. Merchants, craftsmen, and guilds offer opportunities unknown in the countryside. Within the walls of a town, a man may be free, no longer bound to a lord's field. The saying spreads, "Town air makes free." For serfs, the idea that life could be different plants a seed of longing. Some slip away in the night, seeking a new beginning within the crowded streets of a city. The growth of markets also changes life in the village. Instead of paying dues in grain or chickens, lords begin to accept coins. Money circulates more widely, and peasants find themselves drawn into a wider economy. With money comes choice, and with choice comes the possibility of independence. Though still bound to the manor, villagers taste a hint of something beyond it. Tensions rise in times of war as well. Lords demand heavier taxes to fund campaigns, calling on peasants to give more when they already have less. Soldiers passing through take food, trample crops, or press villagers into service. The promise of protection, once the justification of lordship, feels hollow when raiders or mercenaries leave devastation in their wake. The bond between protector and protected begins to fray. Not all the cracks are material. Some are spiritual. The church, so central to medieval life, faces growing criticism. When priests live in comfort while peasants starve, resentment simmers. When bishops engage in politics, villagers question whether the church truly speaks only for God. These doubts remain small, but they add to the sense that the old order is less secure than it once seemed. Children still grow up believing they will live and die on the same land, bound by the same duties. Yet whispers of change are carried by traders returning from distant places, by travelers who speak of cities, and by the memory of hunger that refuses to fade. Each story, each hardship, is like a tiny crack in the stone walls of the manor. Picture the village once more. The cottages remain, the fields still stretch under the sky, and the manor house still stands tall. But look closer. A father divides his land among too many sons, leaving each with too little to live on. A mother watches her children eat thin broth, knowing the stores will not last until spring. A young man listens to a passing trader, his heart stirred by the thought of life beyond these fields. The surface appears unchanged, yet beneath it all, the ground begins to shift. The first cracks have appeared. They will widen in the years to come, pushed apart by forces greater than the villagers can imagine. Soon, famine, plague, and revolt will shake the foundations of feudal life. For now, the bonds still hold, but they no longer feel eternal. The age of the manor is beginning to weaken, and history is preparing to move in a new direction. Part 4. The Black Death. The cracks in feudal life had begun to show. Hunger, crowded villages, and rising discontent had already weakened the old order. But nothing could prepare Europe for the catastrophe that swept across the continent in the mid-14th century. It came silently at first, carried on ships, hidden in the movement of trade. Soon it would change not only lives but the very structure of society itself. This was the Black Death. Picture the bustling port of a medieval city. Ships arrive from distant lands, carrying goods that promise wealth and variety, spices, silks, and precious metals. But hidden in the shadows are small, ordinary creatures, rats scurrying in the dark corners of cargo holds, and the fleas that cling to them. Within these fleas lurks a deadly bacterium, invisible yet devastating. As the ships unload their cargo, they also release the seeds of disaster. The plague moves swiftly. First in the ports, then along trade routes, it spreads from town to town and village to village. At its height, between the years 1347 and 1351, it claims millions of lives. Entire families vanish in a matter of days. Villages are left empty, fields untended, and churches filled with the cries of the grieving. No one understands the cause. Some blame poisoned wells, others think it is the wrath of God. Fear spreads as fast as the disease itself. In the manor, the effects are immediate and overwhelming. Where once there were many hands to work the fields, now there are few. Serfs and peasants die by the thousands. Cottages stand silent, doors swinging open, the smoke from hearths long gone cold. The Lord may call for labor, but no one remains to answer. In some places, whole villages are abandoned, the land returning to forest and wild grass. For those who survive, the world feels entirely changed. The bonds that tied them to the manor no longer hold with the same strength. Labor is suddenly scarce, and this scarcity gives workers power they never had before. A peasant who once had no choice but to obey now finds that his labor is in demand. Lords, desperate to have their fields plowed and harvested, begin offering better terms, reduced rents, higher wages, or even freedom from certain obligations. The strict order of feudalism loosens, replaced by bargaining and negotiation. Imagine the feeling of a peasant walking across a field after the plague. Where once there were many neighbors working beside him, now the rows are nearly empty. He knows that his work is needed more than ever. For the first time, he can refuse unfair demands, confident that another lord will hire him if his own does not treat him well. This quiet shift marks the beginning of a profound change in the balance of power between lord and peasant. The plague does more than alter labor. It shakes the foundations of faith itself. The church, long the guiding light of medieval life, cannot explain why so many die. Prayers, processions, and fasting fail to stop the spread. Priests themselves fall ill and perish. For many villagers, this failure brings doubt. If the church cannot protect them, if the sacraments cannot save their loved ones, then perhaps the old certainty is not as firm as they believed. Some turn to new forms of devotion, while others begin to question the authority of the clergy altogether. Fear drives people to desperate actions. In some places, strangers are blamed, outsiders persecuted, and minorities accused of bringing the plague. Communities fracture under the strain of loss and suspicion. The sense of unity that once held villages together weakens, leaving behind scars of mistrust. Yet even within the devastation, life slowly resumes. Survivors rebuild, though nothing is quite the same. Land once worked by many is now divided among fewer families, giving them more to cultivate. Wages rise where money is used, and peasants who once saw no chance of improvement now glimpse new possibilities. Some buy their freedom, some move to towns, and some simply negotiate better terms. The rigid system of lord and serf bends under the weight of these changes. The plague also alters the very shape of villages. With so many gone, some settlements shrink or vanish, while others grow as survivors gather together. Abandoned cottages collapse into ruins, their stones later used for new buildings. Fields once carefully managed fall wild, dotted with the flowers and grasses of neglect. The landscape itself carries the memory of the Black Death, written in empty spaces and silent farms. Children grow up hearing the stories of those years, their lives forever marked by the shadow of loss. Songs and tales carry the memory, reminding future generations of the time when death walked among them. The old rhythm of feudal duty never quite returns. Too much has changed, and too many have seen what life might be when the old bonds loosen. The Black Death, then, is not only a tragedy of lives lost. It is also a turning point. By stripping away so many, it breaks the balance that feudalism depends upon. Lords cannot command as they once did. Peasants discover new strength in their scarcity. The church, once unquestioned, faces doubt. Towns attract more newcomers, eager to escape the constraints of the manor. The system that seemed eternal now shows itself to be fragile. Imagine again walking through a village in the years after the plague. The cottages are fewer, the silence heavier, but those who remain carry themselves differently. A peasant bargains with the steward over his rent. A young woman chooses to leave for the city, knowing her labor is valuable. A child plays in a field once crowded with workers, now open and wide. The world feels uncertain, but it also feels new. The Black Death has torn a hole in the fabric of feudal life. Through that hole, change begins to pour. What comes after will not arrive all at once, but slowly, shaped by revolt, trade, war, and the steady pull of freedom. The age of feudalism has been wounded, and though it lingers, its end has begun. Part 5. Peasants' Revolts. The years following the Black Death were not years of calm recovery. The plague had broken families, emptied villages, and shaken the authority of lords and clergy alike. But out of this devastation came something new, a sense of possibility. Peasants who survived found themselves in greater demand than ever before. Their hands could plough fields, sow grain, and harvest crops, but now they realized those hands were valuable. For the first time in centuries, the lowest members of society held some measure of bargaining power. And when lords tried to tighten their grip, peasants pushed back. The result was unrest, simmering at first, then bursting into open revolt. Across Europe, the 14th century and beyond saw peasants rise against their lords in waves of protest, rebellion, and sometimes violence. These uprisings did not destroy feudalism on their own, but they revealed just how fragile the system had become. To understand why revolts spread, imagine once more the life of a peasant after the plague. Many of his neighbors are gone. Entire strips of land now lie untended. His lord, desperate for labor, allows him to work more freely, perhaps even pays him wages instead of demanding endless days of service. For a time, the peasant feels the taste of improvement. His family eats better, and his work carries weight. But lords and kings are not blind to this shift. They see peasants demanding higher wages, refusing old obligations, even leaving the manor to find better terms elsewhere. To them, this freedom looks like disorder, a threat to the old way of life. Laws are passed to hold peasants in place. In England, the Statute of Labourers in 1351 forbids workers from asking for higher wages and orders them to stay where they belong. Similar rules appear in other lands, each one trying to force the world back into its old shape. But the old shape no longer fits. Hunger and poverty remain. Taxes increase, especially as kings seek money for wars. The gap between noble wealth and peasant struggle feels sharper than ever. Underneath the surface, resentment grows. The most famous of these uprisings comes in England in 1381, known as the Peasants' Revolt. It begins with anger over new poll tax, a charge that falls heavily on the poor. Across villages, peasants refuse to pay. Bands gather, marching toward London under the leadership of figures like Wat Tyler and John Ball. Picture the scene. Thousands of common people, once silent in their obedience, now marching with staffs, bows, and whatever weapons they can carry. Their voices rise with demands, not only an end to heavy taxes but also freedom from serfdom itself. John Ball, a fiery preacher, speaks words that echo through the crowd. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? His question cuts to the heart of feudal order. If God created all equally, why should some rule while others serve? The rebels reach London. They storm the Tower, burn records of feudal obligations, and execute officials they see as corrupt. For a brief moment, the old hierarchy trembles. Even the young King Richard II meets with the rebels, promising reforms. Hope surges among the crowds. But the promise does not last. Wat Tyler is killed in a clash, and the revolt collapses. The king retracts his pledges, and lords regain control. Punishments fall on villages that rose in rebellion. Yet the memory cannot be erased. Though the revolt is crushed, the idea that peasants could rise, speak, and demand change remains. England is not alone in rebellion. Across the Channel, France sees its own uprisings, known as the Jacquerie in 1358. Here, peasants rise not only against taxes but against the violence of war itself. The 100 Years' War between England and France brings devastation to the countryside. Armies pillage, burn, and trample fields. Villagers suffer endlessly while nobles continue their struggles for power. The rebellion begins with desperation but quickly turns into fury. Peasants attack manor houses, kill lords, and burn records of obligation. For a time, the revolt spreads like wildfire, threatening the nobility itself. But the nobles respond with brutal force. Armies crush the peasants, and thousands are slaughtered. The rebellion ends in blood, yet it leaves behind a message. Peasants will no longer suffer silently. Similar uprisings flare across Europe. In Flanders, workers revolt against high taxes and low wages. In Germany, peasants later rise in massive revolts during the 16th century, inspired in part by religious change. Everywhere, the pattern repeats: suffering, resistance, and brutal suppression. Though most revolts fail in the short term, each one chips away at the certainty of feudal order. Lords realize they cannot always rely on obedience. Peasants realize that they can resist, even if the cost is high. The memory of revolt becomes part of the culture, passed down in stories and whispers. What matters most about these revolts is not whether they succeed, but how they changed the way peasants see themselves. For generations, they accepted their role as fixed, given by God and unchangeable. But rebellion opens a door in the imagination. If peasants can march on London, if they can storm castles, if they can burn the records of their bondage, then perhaps their place is not eternal after all. Even when crushed, these uprisings leave behind a lingering sense of possibility. A serf negotiating with his lord remembers that others once dared to demand freedom. A villager who hears John Ball's words repeats them quietly. Why should some rule while others serve? The bonds of feudalism, once tight as iron, are now looser, frayed by memory and hope. Feudalism does not collapse overnight. Lords still hold land, peasants still work fields, and obligations remain. But after the revolts, nothing is quite the same. The fear of rebellion lingers in the minds of the nobility. The possibility of change lingers in the hearts of the peasants. The revolts mark a turning point in the story of feudalism's decline. They show that the system, once unquestioned, is now challenged openly. They reveal the growing strength of common people, empowered by scarcity of labor, anger at injustice, and the simple desire for a better life. As you imagine the village once more, see it differently than before. The cottages are the same, the fields stretch as they always have, but something has shifted. A man remembers marching with a crowd to the city. A woman recalls hiding in fear as soldiers punished her neighbors. A child listens to elders tell of the time when peasants rose against their lords. The bonds of the manor are still there, but they no longer feel unbreakable. The first cracks had appeared with famine. The Black Death widened them into great gaps. And now, with revolt, the very structure of feudal life shakes. Something new is on the horizon. Towns that grow, markets that thrive, and a society beginning to look beyond the manor walls. Part 6. The Rise of Towns. The countryside still dominates the medieval world. Fields stretch for miles, villages cluster around manor houses, and the rhythm of life is measured by the sowing of seed and the turning of seasons. Yet, alongside this rural life, something new begins to grow. Small clusters of houses near river crossings, at busy crossroads, or alongside monasteries slowly expand into bustling towns. Their streets are narrow, their buildings pressed tightly together, and their markets alive with noise and color. To those who have lived bound to the soil of the manor, these towns seem like a different world entirely. The growth of towns is tied closely to trade. As Europe recovers from famine and plague, the desire for goods beyond the village grows. Salt to preserve food, iron for tools, cloth from distant regions, and spices from faraway lands all make their way along routes that cross the continent. Merchants travel with carts and pack animals, stopping at market towns where villagers come to buy and sell. At first, these gatherings are occasional, marked by fairs that last a few days. But over time, temporary markets give way to permanent settlements, and fairs evolve into thriving centers of commerce. Within the walls of a town, life follows a rhythm unlike that of the manor. Instead of being tied to the fields of a lord, men and women engage in trades of their own choosing. One may be a blacksmith, shaping iron into nails, horseshoes, and tools. Another may be a weaver, spinning thread and producing cloth. Bakers, butchers, carpenters, and cobblers line the streets with their shops. The air carries the smell of bread, the clang of hammer on anvil, and the murmur of voices bargaining over prices. Here, money is not only a token of dues but the very lifeblood of exchange. For peasants bound to the land, the lure of towns is strong. They hear of places where a man can work for wages, where a woman can sell her weaving, and where the air itself brings freedom. A saying spreads widely, "Town air makes free." In many towns, If a serf can live within the walls for a year and a day without being claimed by his lord, he is considered free. The promise of liberty, once unthinkable in the world of the manor, draws many to risk the journey. Some sneak away in the night, their absence marked only by an abandoned strip of field and an empty cottage. Life in towns is not without hardship. Streets are often filthy, waste is thrown into open ditches, and disease spreads easily in the crowded conditions. Fires break out and sweep through wooden houses. Guilds tightly control who may work in certain trades, and newcomers may find themselves shut out or forced to pay heavy fees. Yet despite these challenges, the town offers something the village does not: choice. In the manor, life is bound by obligation. In the town, it is shaped by opportunity. The rise of towns also changes the balance of power in society. Lords once relied entirely on the labor of peasants and the rents of their manors. Now they see merchants growing wealthy, guilds gaining influence, and towns demanding charters that grant them rights of self-government. Kings, too, notice this shift. Towns become valuable allies, supplying taxes in money rather than labor, and supporting monarchs in their struggles against unruly nobles. In this way, towns help to weaken the feudal lords, transferring power slowly toward the crown. Within towns, guilds play a central role. These are associations of craftsmen and merchants who regulate trade, maintain standards, and protect their members. A young apprentice learns his trade under the watchful eye of a master, slowly advancing to journeyman and, with skill and time, to master himself. Guilds ensure that quality remains high and that outsiders cannot easily take over the market. They also provide a sense of community, offering aid to members in times of sickness or death. For the townspeople, guilds are as important as the manor court is to the peasant. They shape daily life and uphold order in a world of bustling trade. The culture of towns reflects their independence. Bells ring from towers to mark not only the hours of prayer but also the beginning of markets and the closing of gates at night. Festivals are celebrated with processions, music, and colorful banners. New buildings rise: tall stone churches, guild halls, and merchant houses with glass windows that glitter in the sun. Universities grow in some towns, attracting students who debate philosophy, law, and medicine. Knowledge spreads more quickly here than in the quiet fields of the countryside. Yet the connection between town and village remains. Farmers bring their produce to sell in town markets. Merchants carry goods back to rural communities. Pilgrims and travelers pass through both worlds, carrying stories, news, and ideas. The manor and the town are not separate, but increasingly the town pulls people and wealth away from the countryside, drawing them into its orbit. The very existence of towns begins to reshape how people think about their place in the world. In a village, a person's identity is tied to the soil and to the lord who owns it. In a town, identity comes from trade, skill, and money. A successful merchant may rise to wealth and influence, even if he began as the son of a peasant. This mobility challenges the rigid hierarchy of feudal society, suggesting that birth is not the only path to power. As more peasants escape to towns, lords find their labor supply dwindling. Some attempt to force their tenants back, sending agents to track down runaways. Others adapt, converting land from labor-intensive crops to sheep pasture, which requires fewer workers. The countryside shifts slowly, reflecting the pull of the urban centers. Feudal bonds, once secure, now feel fragile, stretched thin by the promise of freedom beyond the manor walls. Imagine walking through such a town at dusk. The streets are crowded with stalls, their candles flickering in the twilight. A smith closes his shop, the clang of hammer replaced by the chatter of neighbors. Children chase one another between the buildings, their laughter echoing against the stone walls. Above it all, the town bell tolls, calling people to prayer or marking the closing of the gates. The sound carries across the rooftops, a reminder that life here is measured not by the harvest but by the rhythm of trade, craft, and community. The rise of towns does not destroy feudalism at once, but it adds weight to the forces already pulling it apart. With each runaway serf who finds freedom, with each merchant who gains wealth, with each charter granted to a town, the manor loses its grip. A new way of living is taking shape, one where obligation is slowly replaced by choice, where money replaces dues, and where community is built not around a lord but around trade and craft. The villagers who once lived their entire lives within a few miles of their birthplace now hear of distant lands, strange goods, and new ideas. The town becomes a doorway to the wider world, and through that doorway, medieval society begins to step. The age of feudalism is fading, and the age of towns, markets, and growing kingdoms is rising to take its place. Part 7. Merchants and Guilds. The towns that began as little more than clusters of huts beside river crossings or crossroads are now growing into vibrant centers of life. Markets buzz with activity, narrow streets hum with voices, and carts filled with goods rumble over cobblestones. From dawn until dusk, the air is alive with sounds and smells that mark a new rhythm of living. It is here, in the rising world of merchants and guilds, that the seeds of change take firmer root, reshaping not only towns but the entire structure of medieval society. The merchant is a new kind of figure in this world. Unlike the peasant bound to soil or the knight bound to land and lord, the merchant's wealth comes from movement. He trades cloth from one region for wine from another, carries salt from inland mines to coastal ports, or brings spices from distant lands back to eager buyers. His life is measured not by harvests but by markets and fairs. He knows the danger of bandits, the uncertainty of weather, and the risk of investing in goods that may never sell. Yet he also knows the thrill of profit, the chance that a single successful journey might bring more wealth than years of tilling fields. Merchants begin to form associations to protect their trade. They share costs of caravans, hire guards to keep roads safe, and negotiate with lords and kings for the right to pass toll gates. Over time, their influence grows. A wealthy merchant might lend money to a noble, finance the building of a church, or secure a charter that grants his town the right to govern itself. These acts shift power subtly but steadily. Where once wealth and authority lay only in land, now it flows also through trade and coin. Inside the towns, guilds emerge to give order and structure to this bustling economy. A guild is more than a simple association. It is the backbone of urban life. There are merchant guilds that regulate trade across regions, and craft guilds that control the work of artisans within a town. A guild decides who may enter a trade, what standards must be upheld, and what prices may be charged. It also offers protection, ensuring that its members are supported if sickness strikes or if hardship falls upon a family. To become part of a guild is not quick or easy. A boy may begin as an apprentice, working long hours under the eye of a master. He learns the secrets of the craft, from the careful shaping of leather to the precise mixing of dyes. In return, he is fed, housed, and given the promise of a future. After years of service, he may become a journeyman, traveling from town to town, offering his skills and learning from others. Only when his work is judged to be of high quality, often through the creation of a masterpiece, may he rise to the rank of master and open his own shop. The path is demanding, but it brings respect, security, and a sense of belonging. Guilds do more than regulate work. They shape the very culture of towns. Their halls, often built of stone and richly decorated, stand as symbols of pride and unity. Within them, members meet not only to discuss trade but also to celebrate festivals, to care for the sick, and to bury the dead. Processions on feast days fill the streets with banners and music, each guild displaying its trade with pride. Bakers carrying loaves of bread, smiths with their tools, weavers with bright cloth. For townspeople, the guild is both a workplace and a community, tying individuals into something larger than themselves. Merchants, too, transform the appearance and character of towns. Their houses rise tall along the main streets, often built with stone and decorated with carved beams or glass windows. Inside, goods from distant lands are stored: rolls of fine cloth, barrels of wine, sacks of spices, and chests filled with coins. These merchants begin to hold influence not only in markets but also in politics. Town councils often include leading merchants, whose wealth gives them a voice equal to or greater than that of traditional lords. In some places, merchants even become mayors or leaders of entire cities. This rise of merchant power challenges the old order in quiet but steady ways. A noble's wealth is tied to his estate, but a merchant's wealth is mobile, flowing where opportunity leads. Nobles may demand taxes from towns, but they increasingly rely on the money merchants provide to fund wars or maintain courts. With each loan, each charter, each grant of privilege, the balance tips further. Feudal bonds, rooted in land and obligation, grow weaker in the shadow of growing urban wealth. Life in the town is not free of struggle. Rival guilds compete for dominance, and disputes break out between merchants and craftsmen. Strikes, boycotts, and even violent clashes sometimes erupt. Yet these conflicts reveal another important shift. People are no longer silent. They organize, demand, and defend their rights within a framework of law and charter. It is a new kind of politics, one born not from knights and castles but from shops, stalls, and meeting halls. The culture of guilds and merchants also leaves its mark on families. Sons often follow their fathers into a trade, but daughters, too, find roles within guild households, assisting in workshops, managing accounts, or selling goods in markets. Women in towns, though limited by law and custom, often enjoy greater opportunity than their sisters in villages. A widow might inherit her husband's workshop and continue the trade, her skill and presence respected within the guild. The daily life of a town is full of variety compared to the monotony of village existence. One day, a great fair fills the streets with travelers, jugglers, musicians, and stalls selling everything from woolen cloaks to exotic spices. Another day, a merchant caravan arrives, bringing news from distant lands. Bells toll for weddings, christenings, and funerals, weaving the cycle of life into the fabric of urban sound. Compared to the slow rhythm of sowing and reaping, the town seems quick, changeable, and alive. Picture yourself walking through a market square on a busy morning. Stalls line the cobblestones, their awnings flapping in the breeze. A baker pulls fresh loaves from his oven, their crusts golden and steaming. A cloth merchant unfurls bolts of dyed fabric, their colors vivid against the gray stone of the buildings. Children dart between the stalls, laughing as they chase one another. The air is filled with scents: bread, meat, smoke, and spices faintly carried from foreign lands. Voices rise and fall as buyers and sellers haggle, the clink of coins marking the final word. This is the sound of a new economy, one built not on obligation but on exchange. As merchants and guilds grow stronger, they begin to look outward. Trade routes stretch across mountains and seas, linking towns to regions far beyond their walls. Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa send ships across the Mediterranean, while merchants from Flanders trade woolen cloth across northern Europe. These networks pull the continent together in ways feudal manors never could. The village once felt like the whole world. Now it is part of something vast and interconnected. The rise of merchants and guilds does not erase the old world of lords and peasants overnight. Fields are still plowed, rent still paid, and castles still rise on hillsides. Yet the focus of wealth and influence is shifting. The manor may remain the heart of rural life, but the town is becoming the engine of change. Through trade, skill, and organization, common people find new power. The system of feudalism, built on the certainty of rank and duty, now faces competition from a society where money, craft, and knowledge can alter a person's fate. Imagine, at the close of day, the town settling into evening. Merchants count their coins by candlelight, guild masters meet in halls, and apprentices close the shutters of their workshops. The streets quiet, but the sense of energy remains. Behind those doors and windows, ideas of independence, prosperity, and community are taking root. The world of merchants and guilds is more than a new way of earning a living. It is a new way of imagining life itself. The manor once defined existence, holding people in its bonds. Now the town offers another vision, one where skill and exchange matter more than inherited status. In this vision lies the future. The rise of merchants and guilds marks another step in the slow decline of feudalism, pushing Europe toward a world where the bonds of land and lord give way to the bonds of trade, law, and shared ambition. Part 8. Kings and Central Power. For centuries, the feudal order has given power to lords who rule their own lands like small kings, each with their castles, their soldiers, and their peasants tied to the soil. A monarch, though crowned as ruler of a realm, often holds authority in name more than in fact. His strength depends on the loyalty of nobles who command their own private armies and enforce their own justice. But as towns rise, merchants grow wealthy, and old bonds weaken, kings begin to gather power into their own hands. Slowly and steadily, the balance shifts, and monarchs transform from figureheads into rulers with true central authority. The process is gradual, shaped by both necessity and opportunity. Wars play a large part. To fight long campaigns, kings need money, not just soldiers bound by feudal service. Money pays for mercenaries, builds fortifications, and supplies armies across great distances. Feudal dues, based on labor and obligation, cannot sustain these needs. But towns, with their merchants and wealth, can. Kings discover that by granting towns charters and privileges, they gain steady income in return. A monarch who once begged for support from powerful nobles now finds allies in merchants eager for royal protection of trade. Picture a medieval king walking through a chartered town. The narrow streets are crowded, the stalls bursting with goods, the guilds proud of their craft. Here, loyalty does not come from oaths of feudal duty but from agreements written on parchment, sealed with wax. The town pays taxes directly to the crown. In return, the king offers rights, protection, and recognition. Each charter strengthens the bond between monarch and town while loosening the hold of local lords. As kings lean more heavily on money rather than feudal service, their armies change as well. Instead of relying only on knights summoned by obligation, they begin to recruit professional soldiers. Paid from royal coffers, these men fight for wages rather than for land. Over time, the king's forces grow larger and more dependable than the patchwork levies of feudal lords. The power of the sword begins to shift toward the center, leaving nobles less essential than before. Justice, too, becomes a tool of central power. In the old order, each lord's court judged disputes within his lands. But kings increasingly insist that ultimate authority lies with them. Royal courts expand, issuing laws that apply across the realm. A peasant once tied to the justice of his local lord might now appeal to the king's judges. Merchants traveling between towns prefer the consistency of royal law to the confusion of dozens of separate feudal courts. The king, by presenting himself as the guarantor of fair justice, builds loyalty among those weary of local abuses. Taxes, armies, and law. These three pillars give monarchs new strength. But they are supported by the wider changes of society. The Black Death has weakened feudal bonds. Revolts have shown the fragility of noble power. Towns and guilds seek order and protection that only a strong central authority can provide. Each force pushes in the same direction, away from a fragmented feudal landscape and towards centralized monarchy. In England, kings use these forces to expand their reach. The long wars with France demand vast sums of money, leading to new taxes that strengthen the crown's financial base. In France itself, monarchs consolidate lands under direct control, weakening rebellious nobles and building one of the first centralized states in Europe. In Spain, the eventual uniting of kingdoms under Ferdinand and Isabella creates a powerful monarchy capable of launching voyages across oceans. These examples mark the gradual emergence of something new, the early nation-state. The image of a king changes as well. He is no longer just the first among nobles, dependent on their support, but increasingly seen as the embodiment of the realm itself. His banners fly not just in castles but in towns and marketplaces. His face appears on coins that pass through countless hands. His messengers carry decrees across mountains and rivers, binding diverse regions under single authority. Where once the manor defined identity, now allegiance to a crown begins to take its place. Yet this growth of central power is not without resistance. Nobles do not willingly surrender their privileges. Conflicts erupt, sometimes plunging kingdoms into civil war. The English barons force King John to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, limiting royal power and asserting their rights. In France, great dukes and counts resist efforts at centralization. In Germany and Italy, where towns and princes hold strong, monarchy remains fragmented for centuries. The struggle between noble privilege and royal authority is long and often violent, but the direction of history is clear. Religion plays its part in this transformation as well. Kings claim divine right, insisting their authority is granted by God. Coronation ceremonies become sacred rituals, blending politics with faith. The Church, though still powerful, increasingly finds itself negotiating with monarchs who no longer accept its dominance without question. The crown and the altar remain entwined, but the crown is growing heavier in the balance. Imagine the experience of an ordinary villager living through these changes. His life may still revolve around fields and seasons, yet he begins to notice subtle differences. Instead of answering only to his lord, he now pays taxes to royal officials who travel through the countryside. Instead of local disputes decided only by manor courts, he hears of royal judges arriving to enforce new laws. When war comes, it is not just a feudal levy but a royal army marching under the banner of the king. The world feels larger, its authority more distant, yet also more powerful. Merchants and townspeople feel the change even more directly. Their prosperity depends on safe roads, predictable laws, and stable currency, all of which a strong monarch can provide better than dozens of feudal lords. In supporting the king, they secure their own interests, and in return the king draws wealth and legitimacy from them. This alliance becomes one of the defining features of the new Europe taking shape. As castles crumble into ruins and towns rise into prominence, the image of power shifts steadily toward the monarch. Feudal lords still hold land, but their grip on destiny weakens. The center grows stronger, the edges weaker. In this shift lies the quiet dismantling of feudalism and the building of something new. Picture a royal court at the height of its splendor. Nobles and clergy gather, merchants petition, and ambassadors from foreign lands kneel before the throne. The hall is filled with light from great windows, banners hang from the walls, and music echoes from minstrels. At the center, The king sits not as a mere noble among others, but as the sovereign of a realm. His word carries across the land, his seal binds charters, and his armies march under his command. The spectacle is more than display. It is the visible proof of centralized power. The age of kings and central authority is beginning to rise. It will not end every hardship, nor will it erase inequality, but it will create a new framework in which feudalism has less space to survive. The bonds of manor and serf, once the foundation of society, now give way to the broader bonds of crown and subject. This change, built slowly over centuries, sets the stage for the modern world. The old feudal system has not vanished, but it no longer stands unchallenged. The king's power, drawn from towns, merchants, taxes, and law, pushes steadily against the castles of the nobility. Centralization is not yet complete, but the direction of history is clear. The crown is rising, and the feudal age is falling away. Part 9. The End of the Knight. For centuries, the knight has stood as the very image of feudal power. Clad in armor, mounted on a war horse, and bound by oath to his lord, he embodies the spirit of an age defined by loyalty, land, and war. His presence on the battlefield is not only a military force but also a symbol of the system itself. A knight's training begins in childhood, his life dedicated to the arts of combat and chivalry, his honor tied to service. In the minds of both noble and peasant, the knight seems unshakable, as permanent a figure as the castle on the hill. Yet even this figure, so central to feudal life, begins to fade. New weapons, new tactics, and new armies rise, undermining the dominance of mounted warriors and hastening the decline of the feudal order. The change begins quietly, almost invisibly, in the hands of common soldiers. The longbow, a simple weapon of wood and string, emerges as a force capable of piercing even the strongest armor. In battles such as Crecy in 1346 and Agincourt in 1415, English archers unleash storms of arrows that cut down ranks of heavily armored knights. What once seemed invincible is revealed as vulnerable. The power of the knight, built on skill and costly equipment, cannot withstand the sheer volume of arrows launched by ordinary men trained to draw and release with deadly rhythm. Gunpowder adds another blow to the knightly image. First appearing in Europe in the 13th century, it grows in power and use over the following centuries. Cannons shatter castle walls that once stood impregnable. Handheld firearms, crude at first, evolve into weapons capable of piercing armor with terrifying force. The thunder of guns replaces the clash of swords as the sound of battle. Nobles who once relied on stone fortifications and armored retainers find themselves outmatched by those who can afford cannons and gunpowder, tools of war that no feudal levy can easily supply. With these changes comes the rise of professional armies. Monarchs, drawing on the wealth of towns and merchants, hire soldiers to serve not for land or loyalty but for pay. Mercenaries march across Europe, skilled in pike formations, artillery, and disciplined tactics. These troops do not melt away after a campaign, as feudal levies once did, but remain as standing forces ready to fight at the command of kings. The role of the knight, bound by oath and tradition, shrinks in comparison to the massed ranks of common soldiers trained and paid to fight. Imagine a battlefield at the turn of the 15th century. Knights in shining armor ride forward, banners snapping in the wind, their lances lowered for a charge. Across from them stand rows of foot soldiers, pikes braced, muskets ready, and cannons waiting to fire. The thunder of artillery shakes the ground, smoke rises in thick clouds, and the knights, once the terror of the field, are cut down before they can even reach the enemy lines. The sight is shocking not only for its violence but for its meaning. The old ways no longer guarantee victory. The decline of the knight also carries cultural weight. Chivalry, the code that once defined noble conduct, begins to feel out of place in a world of mercenaries and gunpowder. Tales of gallant deeds and tournaments persist, but they belong more to romance and memory than to reality. Nobles still ride in armor at festivals and ceremonies, but the battlefield has moved on. The knight remains in song and story, a symbol of a fading age rather than the center of power. For peasants and townspeople, this shift is deeply significant. The fear inspired by mounted warriors lessens as new weapons give common soldiers the power to resist. The monopoly of violence once held by the nobility is broken. A serf who once trembled at the sight of armored riders now sees that men like him, armed with bows or guns, can stand against them. This realization further undermines the hierarchy of feudal society, opening the way for broader changes in politics and economy. Castles, too, lose their dominance. For centuries, they were the strongholds of feudal lords, symbols of control and authority. Thick walls, high towers, and deep moats gave lords security against rebellion and invasion alike. But with the spread of cannon, these walls crumble under bombardment. The castle, once a guarantee of safety, becomes a relic, impressive in appearance but vulnerable in practice. Nobles shift from stone fortresses to palaces, places of display rather than defense, reflecting a new age where central monarchs, not feudal lords, hold ultimate authority. The transition is not sudden. Knights do not vanish overnight. Tournaments still draw crowds, and nobles continue to pride themselves on their martial heritage. In some battles, cavalry charges remain decisive, but the trend is unmistakable. Each generation sees fewer knights leading armies and more common soldiers filling the ranks. Wealth and power flow toward those who can supply gunpowder, pay wages, and maintain permanent forces. The knight, once the symbol of feudal strength, becomes instead a symbol of its decline. Imagine the experience of a young squire in the 15th century. He trains with sword and lance, dreams of earning his spurs, and looks with or upon the tales of past battles. Yet when he marches to war, he finds himself outshone not by heroic charges but by the roar of cannon and the discipline of infantry. His armor, polished to a mirror's shine, dents under bullets. His horse, bred for battle, falters before walls of pikes. The world he dreamed of serving no longer exists, and he senses, even if dimly, that his place is not what it once would have been. For monarchs, this transformation is an opportunity. Freed from dependence on noble knights, they build armies loyal only to the crown. The image of war shifts from small bands of vassals to vast forces commanded from the center. As the knight falls, the king rises, his authority strengthened by the tools of a new age. Feudalism, based on the exchange of land for military service, loses its foundation when military service can be bought with coin and supplied by professionals. By the close of the Middle Ages, the knight remains more as ceremony than as force. His image endures in stories, his armor gleams in halls, but his time as the master of war has ended. The battlefield belongs to common soldiers, cannons, and the organized armies of kings. The shift is more than military, it is social and political as well. Without the knight, the nobility loses its unique role, and without that role, feudalism loses one of its strongest supports. Picture, finally, the fading image of the knight. The sun sets on a tournament field where riders tilt at one another for honor and applause. Beyond the field, cannons stand ready, their barrels pointed toward distant walls. The contrast is sharp. One belongs to memory, the other to the future. The knight has not disappeared, but he has been outpaced. His decline marks yet another step in the unraveling of a system that once seemed eternal. The fall of the knight is not just the end of a warrior class. It is the end of an era, a visible sign that feudalism's foundations are crumbling. The armor may still shine, the songs may still praise, but history has moved on. The age of the knight has passed, and with it, the age of feudalism draws nearer to its end. Part 10. The Church in Decline. For much of the Middle Ages, the Church stands as the strongest thread weaving society together. Its bells mark the hours, its festivals give rhythm to the year, and its teachings explain the meaning of life and death. From the smallest village chapel to the great cathedrals rising over towns, the Church holds immense authority. It blesses kings, comforts peasants, and frames the entire order of feudal life as part of God's design. Yet as centuries pass, this authority weakens. Doubts spread, scandals shake confidence, and new ideas begin to stir. Just as lords lose power to kings and knights yield to canons, so too does the Church face decline. The Black Death strikes one of the first great blows. Priests pray, processions are held, and relics are carried through streets, yet the plague rages on. When so many die despite the sacraments, villagers question whether the Church has the answers it claims. In some places, priests themselves fall in such numbers that parishes are left without shepherds. Trust, once unshakable, begins to fracture. People still cling to faith, but it is a faith tinged with doubt, a faith less certain that the Church can explain or protect. Corruption further weakens respect. Bishops and abbots often live in wealth while peasants struggle to feed their families. Simony, the selling of church offices, becomes common. Indulgences, promises of reduced punishment for sin, are sold for money, turning spiritual grace into transaction. Such practices anger ordinary believers who expect holiness, not commerce. The contrast between preaching poverty and living in splendor grows too sharp to ignore. Conflicts within the Church add to the decline. In the 14th century, the papacy moves from Rome to Avignon, leading to accusations that the Pope is controlled by French kings. Later, the Great Schism splits the Church with rival popes claiming authority in Rome and Avignon. For nearly 40 years, Europe is divided, unsure who is the true head of Christendom. The unity that once bound people under a single spiritual leader is broken. Instead of certainty, there is confusion and bitterness. At the same time, new voices begin to call for reform. Preachers like John Wycliffe in England and Jan Hus in Bohemia speak against corruption and demand a return to a purer form of Christianity. They question not only the behavior of the clergy but also the very authority of the institution. Their followers spread ideas that the Bible, rather than the Pope, should be the ultimate source of truth. These early reformers are condemned, some executed, but their words take root. Seeds of change are planted, seeds that will later grow into full reformation. For ordinary people, the decline of the Church is felt in subtle but significant ways. A peasant still attends Mass, still marks holy days, still teaches children prayers. Yet beneath these habits lies less certainty. The Church no longer feels like an unbreakable pillar but more like an institution with cracks, vulnerable to criticism. Villagers whisper about priests who neglect duties, monks who break vows, or bishops who seem more lord than shepherd. The reverence remains, but it is mixed with suspicion. Townspeople, exposed to wider ideas through trade and education, feel this change even more. Universities debate theology in ways that sometimes challenge orthodoxy. Merchants who travel across borders notice how papal disputes weaken respect for authority. Writers and poets begin to portray clergy not only as holy but also as flawed, mocking greed or hypocrisy. Art and literature reflect a world where faith is still central, yet its guardians are no longer beyond reproach. The weakening of the Church's authority has political consequences as well. Monarchs, once humbled before papal power, increasingly assert independence. Kings appoint bishops loyal to the crown, tax church lands, and resist papal commands. When excommunication once could terrify rulers, now it is treated with defiance. The balance of power tilts away from the altar and toward the throne. Even spiritually, new movements arise. Mystics emphasize personal experience of God rather than formal rituals. Lay brotherhoods form, where ordinary men and women gather to pray, care for the poor, and live devoutly outside clerical structures. Pilgrimages continue, but they mingle with local traditions and personal devotion that do not always match official teaching. Faith remains strong, but its center of gravity shifts slowly away from the authority of Rome. Imagine a villager walking through the ruins of a once grand monastery, its fields empty, its cloisters silent. The buildings still stand, but the community has dwindled, the wealth dispersed, the holiness questioned. Or picture a bustling town square where a preacher shouts fiery words against indulgences, drawing a crowd of curious listeners. The church is still present, but no longer unquestioned, no longer absolute. This decline does not mean that faith itself vanishes. On the contrary, belief in God remains as deep as ever. Cathedrals continue to rise, stained glass glows with color, and prayers are whispered daily in countless homes. What changes is trust in the institution. The old bond that tied heaven, earth, and feudal order into a single chain weakens. People begin to imagine that salvation and truth may lie outside the strict control of clergy. By the close of the Middle Ages, the church is still powerful, but its dominance is fading. Its corruption is too visible, its authority too fractured, its hold on kings and people too weakened. The decline is not yet collapse, that will come later with the Reformation, but already the certainty of the old world has been broken. The church, once the unchallenged heart of feudal life, now shares space with kings, merchants, and ordinary believers who question its role. Picture, at last, a candle flickering in a village chapel. The light still glows, steady and warm, but cracks show in the walls around it. The flame continues to burn, but the structure that once protected it is fragile. This is the church in decline, still central, still vital, but no longer unshakable. Its weakening authority marks yet another step in the long fading of feudalism, leaving space for new powers and new ideas to rise. Part 11. The Rise of Nations. For centuries, life has been defined by small circles of loyalty. A peasant is bound to his lord, a knight serves his master, and a bishop answers to his diocese. Even kings, though crowned, often act as first among equals in a patchwork of feudal bonds. But as the Middle Ages draw to a close, these webs of obligation loosen. In their place grows something larger and stronger, the beginnings of nations. Monarchs, merchants, townspeople, and common folk alike find themselves drawn into identities that stretch beyond manor or village. Slowly, the idea of belonging to a kingdom, to a people, to a nation takes root. The shift begins with the consolidation of power by monarchs. For generations, kings have worked to strengthen their authority, chipping away at the independence of feudal lords. Now, with the decline of knights, the weakening of castles, and the support of towns, their efforts gain momentum. Central courts enforce common laws, royal taxes flow steadily from both countryside and cities, and standing armies march under banners that symbolize the realm as a whole rather than one lord among many. The scattered pieces of feudal Europe begin to draw together into more unified states. In France, the long struggle of the 100 Years' War helps forge a sense of shared identity. Though devastating in destruction, the conflict creates the image of France as a single realm defended by its people. The figure of Joan of Arc, a peasant girl who claims divine guidance, rallies soldiers and villagers alike not just for a lord but for France itself. Her story becomes legend, a symbol of unity beyond class or region. In England, the same war fosters a sense of Englishness, shaped by victories at Crecy and Agincourt and strengthened by the use of a common language in law and governance. Out of hardship and bloodshed, the outlines of nations emerge. Spain takes a different path, shaped by the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to reclaim lands from Muslim rulers. When Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile marry, they unite powerful kingdoms under one crown. Their reign not only completes the conquest of Granada but also launches voyages across the Atlantic, extending Spanish identity into a global empire. Here, too, loyalty shifts from local lords to the grandeur of a unified monarchy. The tools of central authority reinforce this process. Royal courts standardize justice, replacing a confusing patchwork of feudal customs with common law. Royal taxes, once resented as intrusions, become the glue that funds armies, roads, and administration. Coinage stamped with the image of the monarch circulates across regions, carrying a symbol of unity in every exchange. Even language plays its role, as rulers promote standard dialects for law and administration, slowly shaping a shared culture. Imagine walking through a town square in the 15th century. Banners hang not only for guilds or local lords but also for the king. Royal officials announce decrees that apply across distant provinces. Merchants pay taxes that support not only their city but the crown itself. The sense of belonging expands, stretching from local community to a broader identity as subjects of a kingdom. Though few yet speak of nationhood in the modern sense, the seeds are there, planted deep in daily life. War continues to be both a burden and a unifier. Standing armies, loyal to monarchs rather than nobles, march across Europe. Common soldiers from different regions fight side by side under the same banner. Victories and defeats are remembered not just as the fortunes of lords but as triumphs or tragedies of the people as a whole. Songs and stories celebrate not merely local heroes but national ones, binding diverse communities together through shared memory. Religion, even as it declines in unquestioned authority, also contributes to unity. Monarchs present themselves as defenders of the faith, linking spiritual duty with national identity. The Church still blesses kings, but the kings now use that blessing to bind their realms more tightly. Pilgrimages, crusades, and religious festivals bring people from distant corners of a kingdom into common cause, reinforcing the sense of shared belonging. The growth of nations also reshapes the experience of ordinary people. A peasant may still plough fields much as his ancestors did, but he now pays taxes that support a monarch's army or contributes grain for a royal granary. A merchant trading in cloth or spices feels the protection of royal laws that extend far beyond his town's walls. A soldier fights not just for his lord but for the realm as a whole. Life is still local, but the awareness of something greater begins to filter down, shaping thoughts and loyalties. The symbols of nations become more visible. Coats of arms, once personal emblems of nobles, evolve into symbols representing entire kingdoms. Royal seals mark documents with authority recognized across regions. Festivals celebrate not only saints and local traditions but also monarchs and national victories. Identity, once fractured into countless layers of feudal allegiance, begins to merge into a broader whole. Resistance remains, of course. Local lords resent losing autonomy, and revolts erupt when taxes rise too high or kings press too hard. Cultural differences within kingdoms make unity fragile. Yet over time, the trend is undeniable. Central power strengthens, local ties weaken, and people begin to see themselves not only as villagers, townsfolk, or subjects of a lord but as members of a nation. Picture a young boy in a village at the close of the Middle Ages. He learns the language of his home, but he also hears royal decrees read aloud in the square. He grows up knowing the name of his king, recognizing the royal banner, and listening to tales of battles fought for his kingdom. Though he may never travel far, his sense of identity stretches beyond his fields, tied to something larger that connects him to people he will never meet. In him, the spirit of nationhood begins to grow. The rise of nations does not erase hardship, nor does it bring equality. Kings remain powerful, peasants remain poor, and divisions endure. But it marks a profound change in how people imagine their place in the world. Feudal bonds of duty and service give way to broader bonds of shared culture, shared laws, and shared loyalty. Out of the ruins of castles, the decline of knights, and the fading authority of the church, the framework of the modern nation slowly takes shape. By the dawn of the Renaissance, Europe is no longer a patchwork of isolated manners and feudal ties. It is a continent where nations are emerging, each with its monarch, its laws, its armies, and its sense of unity. The feudal order has not vanished completely, but it has been transformed, overshadowed by a new vision of collective identity. The people of Europe, once bound tightly to land and lord, now begin to see themselves as part of something much larger. The rise of nations marks another step in the long journey away from feudalism and toward the modern world. Part 12. The Dawn of the Renaissance. The slow decline of feudalism does not only reshape politics and power, it also reshapes the very way people see the world. As the bonds of manor and serf loosen, as kings gather strength and nations rise, the human spirit begins to turn outward, searching for new horizons. What follows is not merely a change of rulers but a flowering of culture, art, and thought. Out of the shadows of the Middle Ages, Europe steps into the dawn of the Renaissance. The Renaissance, meaning rebirth, begins in Italy in the 14th century and spreads across Europe in the centuries that follow. Its roots lie partly in wealth. Italian city-states such as Florence, Venice, and Milan grow rich through trade, banking, and commerce. Merchants and bankers, freed from feudal obligations, pour their resources into patronage of art and learning. Where once the greatest monuments were castles and cathedrals, now palaces, statues, and paintings fill the landscape, celebrating not only God but also the creativity of man. At the heart of this rebirth is a rediscovery of classical knowledge. Ancient texts from Greece and Rome, long neglected or preserved only in monasteries, are copied, translated, and studied anew. Philosophers and scholars read the words of Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and Virgil, finding inspiration in their wisdom. This return to the classics encourages a new way of thinking, known as humanism. Humanism places value on human reason, dignity, and potential. It does not abandon faith, but it broadens focus from heaven alone to the richness of life on earth. Imagine walking through the streets of Florence in the 15th century. Workshops are alive with activity. A sculptor chips away at marble, revealing a figure that seems to breathe. Painters grind pigments into brilliant colors, preparing to capture light and shadow on plaster walls. Architects design buildings with symmetry and proportion, inspired by Roman ruins yet shaped for new purposes. The city itself becomes a gallery, its public spaces adorned with beauty that reflects both devotion and pride in human achievement. The Renaissance also transforms learning. Universities expand, libraries grow, and printing presses spread knowledge more quickly than ever before. In the mid-15th century, Johannes Gutenberg perfects the art of movable type, making books more affordable and accessible. Ideas that once took years to travel now spread in months. A scholar in Paris may read the works of an Italian philosopher, while a merchant in London may own a copy of the Bible in his own language. Knowledge, once the guarded treasure of the few, becomes a force that reaches ever wider. This explosion of learning reshapes faith as well. Humanists study the Bible in its original languages, comparing translations and questioning errors. They call for reform and simplicity, urging believers to focus on true devotion rather than outward ceremony. While the Great Reformation lies just ahead, the Renaissance sets the stage by encouraging inquiry, criticism, and a spirit of renewal. The Church, weakened by scandal and decline, cannot suppress the tide of fresh thought. Art becomes one of the most visible expressions of the Renaissance spirit. Painters such as Giotto, Masaccio, Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo bring new realism to their works. Figures are no longer stiff and symbolic but lifelike, with depth, emotion, and movement. Perspective, a rediscovered technique from antiquity, allows artists to create scenes with breathtaking depth, drawing the viewer into painted worlds. Even religious subjects are infused with human feeling, showing Christ, Mary, and the saints as figures of warmth and compassion rather than distant icons. Science, too, awakens from its long slumber under the weight of medieval tradition. Astronomers question the old models of the heavens, mathematicians refine techniques of measurement, and physicians study the human body with fresh curiosity. Though discoveries are still limited by old beliefs, the spirit of investigation takes hold. Men like Copernicus, Vesalius, and Galileo will later challenge the foundations of knowledge, but the seeds are planted in the Renaissance, nourished by a culture that dares to ask questions. The Renaissance is not confined to Italy. In the north, cities like Bruges, Antwerp, and later Amsterdam flourish as centers of trade and art. In Germany, the printing press spreads ideas with astonishing speed. In England, the reign of Elizabeth I fosters a golden age of drama and poetry, with William Shakespeare giving voice to human complexity in plays that continue to echo across centuries. Each region adapts the Renaissance spirit to its own character, blending local traditions with the broader movement of renewal. For ordinary people, the changes of the Renaissance are felt in different ways. A peasant may not read Plato or commission paintings, but he sees new churches rising with graceful arches, hears sermons influenced by fresh ideas, and notices the spread of literacy among town dwellers. A merchant benefits from the growth of trade routes, bringing goods and news from distant lands. A student, once limited to a few hand-copied texts, now studies from printed books that open windows to knowledge once unimaginable. The Renaissance may begin with elites, but its ripples touch many lives. The very way people see themselves changes. In the medieval world, life is often viewed as preparation for eternity, with earthly existence marked by toil and duty. In the Renaissance, life itself begins to be celebrated. The beauty of the body, the power of the mind, the creativity of the spirit are honored in art, philosophy, and daily life. This shift does not erase hardship. Peasants still labor, wars still rage, and plague still strikes, but it gives new meaning to human experience. The idea that man can shape his destiny, can create and discover, grows stronger. Picture, if you will, a gathering in a Renaissance court. Nobles, scholars, artists, and merchants converse in halls adorned with frescoes and tapestries. Music drifts through the air, blending with the murmur of discussion. A painter unveils a portrait, capturing not only the likeness but the personality of his subject. A scholar reads aloud from a newly printed book, its words sparking debate about virtue, reason, and the soul. This is not the world of the manor court, bound by feudal dues and obligations. It is a world of curiosity, ambition, and shared culture. The Renaissance also expands horizons beyond Europe. Explorers set sail in ships stronger and faster than ever before, guided by improved maps and instruments. Columbus reaches the Americas, Vasco da Gama sails to India, and Magellan's voyage circles the globe. These journeys bring both wonder and upheaval, connecting continents in ways unimaginable to earlier generations. The wealth and knowledge that flow from exploration further fuel the spirit of discovery, tying the Renaissance to the birth of a global age. As the Renaissance dawns, the shadows of feudalism grow longer. The manor still stands, peasants still toil, and nobles still hold titles, but the cultural heart of Europe has shifted. No longer does the world seem fixed and eternal, shaped only by God and tradition. Now it feels open, wide, and full of possibility. Human beings, once bound tightly to roles of service, begin to see themselves as creators, thinkers, and explorers. The feudal world is not yet gone, but it is fading under the bright light of renewal. Picture, at last, a sunrise over Renaissance city. The domes of new churches glow in the morning light, streets fill with merchants, and students hurry to their lessons. In workshops, artists prepare canvases, and in libraries, scholars open books fresh from the press. The sound of hammers, bells, and voices blends into a music of energy and hope. This is the dawn of the Renaissance, a dawn that announces not only the end of an age but the beginning of a new one. Part 13. The economy transformed. The decline of feudalism is not only a story of lords and kings, of knights and churches, but also a story of money. At the heart of the old system lay the land. A lord's wealth came from acres of soil, from peasants who worked it, from rents and dues measured in grain, chickens, or labor. To live was to be tied to the rhythm of the fields. Yet as centuries pass, this foundation shifts. Trade expands, merchants grow wealthy, banks emerge, and coins flow more freely than ever before. The economy itself transforms, pulling Europe steadily away from the world of feudal dues and into an age of commerce, markets, and early capitalism. The change begins in small ways. Where once a peasant might pay his rent in wheat or service, he now finds his lord willing to accept coin. For the lord, money is more useful than barrels of grain. It can buy mercenaries, fund castles, or pay debts. For the peasant, this means he must sell part of his harvest to get coin, linking his life to the markets of nearby towns. Slowly, the barter of feudal obligation gives way to the circulation of money. With it comes choice, mobility, and a sense of independence that the old system could not provide. Towns and cities, rising as centers of trade, become engines of this new economy. Markets expand from local exchanges of food and cloth to international networks carrying goods across seas and mountains. Italian city-states send ships to the east for silks and spices. Flemish towns weave wool into fine cloth sold across Europe. German merchants of the Hanseatic League link the Baltic and North Seas in a web of commerce. Everywhere, goods once rare become more common, and wealth flows not only through land but also through trade. Banking grows alongside this trade. In Florence, families such as the Medici create banking houses that lend money to kings and popes, finance voyages, and support vast commercial networks. Letters of credit allow merchants to travel without carrying heavy chests of coin, safe from thieves. Interest, once condemned by the church as usury, becomes accepted under careful terms. Banking transforms wealth from something tied to harvests into something abstract, mobile, and powerful. A farmer may still measure prosperity in fields of wheat, but a banker measures it in numbers written on parchment, figures that can command armies or build cathedrals. For ordinary people, these changes ripple into daily life. A peasant, once resigned to toil for subsistence, now finds opportunities in selling surplus grain at market. A craftsman in a town depends not on a lord's favor but on the demand of buyers. A woman weaving cloth may sell it not only to her neighbors but also to traders who carry it far away. The economy becomes less about obligation and more about opportunity, though that opportunity is unevenly spread. Some rise to prosperity, others fall into poverty, but the structure itself is transformed. Exploration fuels this transformation further. As ships sail beyond familiar coasts, new goods flood into Europe: sugar, coffee, gold, silver, and later tobacco. The flow of precious metals from the Americas into Spain and beyond floods markets with coin, changing prices and fueling commerce. Trade routes that once ended in the Mediterranean stretch across oceans. Europe begins to look outward, its economy tied not only to its own fields and towns but to distant continents. Guilds adapt uneasily to this world. For generations, they controlled production, ensuring quality and protecting members. But as demand grows and trade expands, their rigid rules sometimes hinder innovation. Wealthy merchants press for freer trade, seeking larger markets and higher profits. The seeds of early capitalism are planted in this tension, between tradition that guards stability and ambition that seeks growth. Over time, the latter wins, as commerce outpaces the careful restrictions of guild life. Imagine walking through a bustling market in Antwerp in the 16th century. Stalls overflow with goods: spices from Asia, furs from Russia, cloth from Flanders, silver from the New World. Merchants shout prices, coins clink in countless hands, and bankers sit at tables counting, recording, and lending. The air is filled with the noise of exchange, the smell of exotic goods, and the energy of a world where money moves faster than carts or ships. Here is the heart of the new economy, pulsing with a rhythm unknown to the feudal fields. This economic transformation weakens feudal bonds even more. A lord who once commanded loyalty through land now finds his tenants buying freedom with coin. A monarch who once relied on knights now pays armies with taxes collected in money. A merchant, once a minor figure, now holds influence that can rival nobility. Wealth shifts from soil to silver, from manor to marketplace. The old structure does not collapse in a single moment, but with each exchange, with each loan, with each voyage, its foundation erodes. The culture of Europe reflects this shift. Portraits of merchants and bankers appear beside those of nobles and kings, their pride in wealth no less than in titles. Literature praises cleverness in trade as much as courage in battle. Townhouses rise with as much grandeur as castles, their walls decorated not with banners of war but with symbols of commerce. Even language changes, as words for profit, contract, and credit become part of common speech. Yet this new economy also brings inequality and risk. Prices rise as coin floods markets, leaving peasants struggling to afford bread. Wealth concentrates in the hands of merchants and bankers, creating new elites. Some towns thrive, others decline as trade routes shift. Wars, too, grow costlier, fueled by taxes that press heavily on the poor. The transformation brings freedom for some but hardship for others. It is not a golden age for all, but it is a new age nonetheless. Picture, finally, the shift in imagination. In the feudal world, prosperity meant fertile land, loyal tenants, and secure castles. In the transformed economy, prosperity means ships sailing, coins flowing, books of account balanced, and markets filled. The center of life moves steadily from the manor to the market, from land to money, from obligation to exchange. The feudal bonds that once seemed eternal now feel like relics, replaced by the dynamic, restless energy of commerce. By the close of the Middle Ages and the dawn of the modern era, Europe is no longer sustained primarily by feudal dues. It is driven by trade, banking, and the early stirrings of capitalism. The manor still stands, but its role is diminished. The future belongs to merchants, financiers, and explorers who shape a new world with every voyage and every coin exchanged. The economy has been transformed, and with it, the very foundations of society. Part 14. Voices of Change. As the centuries turn and the foundations of feudalism weaken, the great transformations of Europe are not carried forward only by kings, merchants, and scholars. They are also carried forward by the countless ordinary people whose lives shift in quiet but profound ways. The voices of peasants, artisans, women, and travelers are often faint in the pages of history, drowned out by chronicles of wars and rulers. Yet these voices matter, for they reveal how the decline of feudalism was experienced not only in palaces and courts but in cottages, workshops, and streets. For the peasant, the change comes slowly but unmistakably. His ancestors worked the land under tight bonds, bound to their lord by duties of labor and rent. Now, more and more, he finds himself paying in coin rather than service, and in coin he discovers a measure of choice. He can decide when to sell his grain, whom to work for, and sometimes whether to leave his village for opportunities elsewhere. Freedom is still limited, but it is greater than before. In some regions, peasants gain the ability to buy their freedom outright, ending centuries of serfdom in a single exchange of silver. The sense of being tied for life to one strip of soil begins to fade. The revolts of the past century have not been forgotten. Even when crushed, they left behind the knowledge that peasants could rise together, could speak, could demand. Whispers of rebellion remain in villages, reminding each generation that obedience is not the only path. A man who negotiates with his landlord now does so with a memory of ancestors who dared to stand up. The spirit of change, once unthinkable, grows in confidence with each small step toward autonomy. In towns, artisans feel the transformation even more directly. The guilds provide security and identity, but they also give workers a sense of dignity. A craftsman may not be noble, but his skill brings respect, and his voice carries weight within his guild. Apprentices train, journeymen travel, and masters build workshops that pass from father to son. The life of a craftsman is not easy, hours are long, and disputes frequent, but it is a life shaped more by choice than obligation. In the guild hall, decisions are made by vote, and rules are debated, a small echo of self-government that contrasts sharply with the rigid hierarchy of feudal manners. Women's voices are often quieter in history, yet they, too, are part of this change. In villages, women still labor alongside men in fields, cook over hearths, and raise children. But in towns, some find opportunities beyond household walls. Widows take over workshops, daughters assist in trade, and women participate in markets, selling produce, cloth, or beer brewed in their homes. Their economic activity gives them a presence that, while limited by law and custom, is nonetheless vital. Over time, this presence plants seeds for greater recognition of women's roles beyond domestic life. Travelers and pilgrims add to the chorus of change. In earlier centuries, most people never left their birthplace. But now, with safer roads, stronger trade routes, and growing curiosity, more move from place to place. Pilgrims walk to shrines, merchants travel with caravans, and students journey to universities in distant cities. With each journey, ideas spread. A villager who once knew only the narrow horizon of his fields now hears stories of Florence, Paris, or London. A craftsman who travels learns new techniques and brings them home. Movement weaves Europe together, breaking the isolation that once defined feudal life. The voices of change are also heard in song and story. Ballads tell of heroes who rise from humble beginnings, tales that suggest greatness is not reserved only for nobles. Stories spread of clever peasants who outwit their lords, of merchants who gain honor through trade, of women who show courage and wisdom. These tales, whether sung in taverns or told by firesides, reflect a shifting imagination. They plant the idea that worth can come from skill, wit, or virtue rather than birth alone. Education adds yet another voice. As printing spreads, Literacy grows slowly but steadily. A merchant's son may read letters to manage trade, a town clerk may copy contracts, a priest may own books beyond scripture. With words come new thoughts, and with new thoughts come questions. The very act of reading becomes a quiet rebellion against a world once content with tradition. Knowledge, once guarded by monasteries, seeps into the hands of common people, changing how they see themselves and their place in the world. Religious devotion, too, takes on new tones. While the Church's authority declines, personal faith remains strong. Lay groups gather to pray, to care for the sick, and to read scripture together. Pilgrimages continue, but many walk them seeking personal meaning rather than only church approval. Mystics write of inner visions, of direct connection with God unmediated by priests. The old hierarchy of faith weakens as ordinary believers claim a more personal voice in their spiritual lives. Imagine a crowded marketplace in a growing town. Bakers call out their bread, smiths hammer iron, children chase one another between stalls. Among the bustle, conversations take place that would have been rare a century before. A peasant, newly freed, speaks of wages earned in town. A merchant discusses prices with a banker. A woman sells her woven cloth directly to passing travelers. The scene is noisy, messy, and full of life, a contrast to the quiet order of feudal villages. Here, the voices of change are loudest, blending into a chorus of opportunity and ambition. Of course, not all voices are joyful. The transformation brings hardship as well as hope. Inflation caused by floods of silver from abroad raises the price of bread. Wars funded by royal taxes weigh heavily on the poor. Displacement occurs as land is enclosed for sheep rather than crops, forcing peasants to leave ancestral homes. These voices of sorrow and anger remind us that change is never simple. The decline of feudalism frees many, but it also unsettles countless lives, creating winners and losers in the new world that emerges. Yet even in hardship, the sense of possibility endures. A farmer forced from his land may find new work in a town. A soldier, once bound by feudal service, may earn wages in a royal army. A scholar, supported by merchant wealth, may write ideas that inspire generations. Each voice contributes to the slow unraveling of feudal bonds, weaving instead a fabric of society defined by exchange, mobility, and individuality. Picture, finally, a village at the edge of this transformation. The manor house still stands, its lord still collecting rents. But in the cottages, change is felt. A young man dreams not of lifelong service but of a journey to the city. A woman teaches her child to read a few letters, hoping for a future beyond the plough. Neighbors discuss rumors of rebellion, of reform, of discovery. The old order remains, but it is no longer unchallenged. Beneath its weight, countless voices rise, each one a thread in the tapestry of change. The decline of feudalism is not a single story told from above. It is a chorus of many stories told from below, of peasants finding freedom, artisans gaining dignity, women stepping into markets, travelers spreading ideas, believers seeking personal faith. These voices, though often faint in the records of history, speak of a world that is shifting. They remind us that the end of an age is carried not only by rulers and armies but also by ordinary people whose lives, choices, and dreams shape the path of history. By the end of the Middle Ages, these voices of change are too many to silence. They echo across villages and towns, across fields and markets, across homes and hearts. Together they carry Europe into a new world, a world no longer bound by feudal chains but open to the possibilities of freedom, ambition, and renewal. Part 15. The World After Feudalism. The world that emerges after centuries of change no longer looks like the one that had been built upon the manor and the castle. The bonds of feudalism, once as firm as stone walls, have loosened and broken. What remains is a new Europe, shaped by towns, nations, trade, and ideas, a world that carries both the memory of the old and the promise of the new. The journey from feudalism to something different is not swift, nor is it without suffering, but by the dawn of the modern age the transformation is clear. In the old order, society was defined by three pillars: those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. The clergy, the nobles, and the peasants together formed a hierarchy believed to be ordained by God. Each person had a fixed place, each duty clear, each role unquestioned. By the end of the Middle Ages, this model has fractured. The clergy no longer holds unquestioned authority, shaken by corruption and the rising tide of reform. The nobles no longer dominate war, their knights replaced by gunpowder and professional armies. The peasants no longer accept silence, their voices raised in revolt, their hands sought for wages. The threefold order collapses, leaving space for something more fluid, more uncertain, and more open to change. The land, once the root of all wealth, no longer stands alone as the measure of power. Trade and money reshape the economy. Merchants and bankers rise to prominence, financing voyages, armies, and palaces. Banking families hold influence that stretches across kingdoms, lending to rulers who once commanded wealth only through fields and rents. Towns become centers not just of commerce but of culture, spreading ideas and fostering ambition. The soil still matters, but coin matters more, and with it comes a new order where wealth can be created, moved, and transformed. Kings seize this opportunity, drawing strength from the decline of local lords. Standing armies loyal to the crown, taxes collected directly from subjects, and laws applied across wide territories shift power steadily to the center. Monarchs rise above nobles, presenting themselves as the embodiment of nations. The people who once saw themselves as subjects of a lord now begin to see themselves as part of a larger realm, tied not only to fields but to banners, symbols, and shared identity. The feudal patchwork yields to the outline of nations, fragile at first but destined to shape the future. Culturally, the Renaissance breathes new life into Europe. Humanism challenges narrow views of existence, turning eyes not only to heaven but also to the worth of life on earth. Art, literature, and science flourish under the patronage of merchants and monarchs alike. Printing spreads knowledge beyond monasteries, allowing ordinary people to read, question, and learn. Exploration carries Europeans to distant continents, reshaping not only their economies but also their imagination. The medieval world, once bounded by familiar horizons, opens to global vision. For ordinary people, the end of feudalism is both liberation and uncertainty. A peasant may no longer be bound to his lord's soil, but he faces the risks of markets, the burden of taxes, and the volatility of prices. An artisan may thrive under the protection of guilds but also face competition in a growing economy. A soldier may fight for wages, no longer bound by feudal duty, but subject to the fortunes of kings and their endless wars. Freedom comes with new challenges, and opportunity comes with new dangers. The social fabric itself changes. Mobility, once rare, becomes more common. Families move from villages to towns, from towns to cities, and from familiar lands to distant colonies. Education spreads slowly but steadily, offering paths beyond inherited roles. Women, though still constrained by law and custom, find spaces in markets, workshops, and households to exercise influence. The idea that one's life must be fixed at birth weakens, even if inequality remains sharp. The dream of something more becomes part of the common imagination. Religion, though still central, no longer holds absolute authority. The decline of the Church's unquestioned power prepares the way for the Reformation, which will soon fracture Europe along new lines of belief. Faith itself does not weaken, but the grip of a single institution over thought and conscience does. The seeds planted in the late Middle Ages bloom into new forms of worship, devotion, and conflict, reshaping the spiritual landscape alongside the political and economic. Picture a village at the turn of this new age. The manor house still stands, but its lord no longer commands unquestioned obedience. Tenants speak of wages and contracts rather than of duties owed for life. In the town nearby, merchants build fine houses, and guild halls bustle with debate. In the city, king's officials record taxes, scholars debate philosophy, and artists paint visions of both the divine and the human. The world feels larger, faster, and more full of possibility than the narrow, ordered lanes of feudal life. The memory of the old world lingers. Songs recall the days of knights and castles, stories of lords and vassals fill the imagination, and traditions of harvest and festival still mark the year. But these memories exist now as heritage, not as destiny. The bonds of feudalism, once the framework of all society, are remembered as something that was, not something that must be. History has turned, and with it, life itself. The world after feudalism is one of contradiction, greater freedom and deeper inequality, wider horizons and harsher conflicts, dazzling creativity and relentless struggle. Yet it is also the world that opens the path to modernity. The foundations of nation-states, capitalism, exploration, and scientific inquiry are laid in this era of transition. Without the decline of feudalism, the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the modern world could not have taken shape. Picture at last a dawn breaking over Europe in the 15th century. Fields still stretch across the countryside, but now roads are busier, markets livelier, towns larger, and courts more powerful. Ships wait in harbors to sail beyond known seas. Printing presses clatter in workshops, their pages carrying knowledge far and wide. Bells ring in cathedrals, but their sound competes with the noise of debate and reform. The sun rises on a continent that has left behind the bonds of feudalism and now steps forward into the uncertain, brilliant light of a new age.